Hello, my friends. Welcome back to another musical moment in the life of the old-time rock and roller. Today we will be focusing a few minutes on a story from the golden age of rock and roll.
Greetings. Welcome once again to Pale Blooms and Beyond. Thank you for joining us. Forrest Howie McDonald is an American singer, songwriter, and instrumentalist whose main body of work has been in the blues and blues rock genre. During the mid to late 60s, Forrest played in a number of bands, which included a stint with Wadsworth Mansion beginning in 1972. Throughout the 70s and 80s, Mr. McDonald played and recorded with various musicians, including playing the guitar solo on Bob Seger's Old Time Rock and Roll. After a move to Atlanta in 1991, Forrest started his own record label, broke out on his own, and formed his own band. To date, he has some 15 releases. Many accolades have been bestowed on Forrest and his music over the years. He has written some 200 songs, has headlined and played tons of festivals, and has a worldwide fan base. His latest, Blues in a Bucket, was nominated for a Grammy. Well, welcome, Forrest.
Hey, Gary, great to be here.
All right, thanks. Oh, there we go. I knew he's gonna get the cameo appearance in there, voice or visual. Well, take us back to the beginning. So you were born in Austin.
That's absolutely correct. 1950. So,
Okay.
although my family was centered around Orange, Texas at the time, and Johnny Winter's drummer, Homer Turner, went to high school with my cousin C. So we were close. And Gatemouth Brown was also from Orange, and he was really good friends with my Uncle Jim.
Wow, that's something else there too. So you had that influence early on there too.
Yeah, that's true. And I'll just throw this in. It has nothing to do with it, but my oldest uncle, Uncle John, was pumping gas at a filling station, and Bonnie and Clyde pulled in and tanked up. Of course, they didn't pay for the gas. And then they went off towards Crowley and wherever it was. And 7 or 8 hours later, they had to shoot out and no more Bonnie and Clyde. So my Uncle John was one of the last to see them alive.
Wow. You know, I used to work with a guy, and he showed us a picture, and it was of Clyde, and we didn't believe him at first. You know, we thought, oh yeah, you're just making all this up, you know. But then I saw the picture again years later online, and I said, wow, he actually had a copy of that, you know. So very very interesting. Well, talk about some other fond childhood memories that you may have.
Well, okay. So when my dad was a college professor and a historian and became a famous constitutional scholar, his first teaching job was at the University of Wisconsin. And when I was 7 years old, he took the family on a Sunday afternoon, about 2 o'clock, and Josh White Jr. was giving a solo concert. We were all on the blanket on the hill, and there's Josh playing. And there was just something about it that just made me feel just warm and safe, and it was a hard to describe moment, but the blues jumped in me. And my dad had Josh at midnight, and Josh White sings spirituals and blues. So I learned several songs off that album and recorded one of the songs off that album on my What's It Gonna Take CD, a song called Southern Exposure. Well, my sister Kathy and I, she's a year and a half older, we always loved watching the Benny Goodman story and the Glenn Miller story and the Gene Krupa story. All that was on at the same time. And then Carl Perkins came out with Blue Suede Shoes. and my dad came back from New York from a trip, and he brought us Elvis Presley Hound Dog and All Shook Up, the 45. And this was 57, 58, 59, I don't know, whenever it was, but it had to be around then because in 59, he got a job teaching at Brown University. So right after Christmas, we packed up and left the frozen tundra of Madison, Wisconsin, and journeyed up to Providence, Rhode Island. And our house was a little summer cottage on Rumstick Point, where wealthy elite would make their summer home and then split. Well, we moved in just after Christmas, and the backyard was right on the bay, and would hear the buoy going clang, clang, and would see the light from the lighthouse, you know, about every 45 seconds flash on the wall behind us. It was just a really eerie vibe, you know. It was kind of cool though. But I started my first band when I was 14. We went to the Episcopal Conference Center, which was the Episcopal Diocese of Rhode Island, and it was basically a church camp. And boy, I did not want to go. I jumped out of the car and hid in the marsh on the way there. But it turned out I asked my mom if I could stay another week after the family camp was over. And it was just really great. I ended up becoming a counselor there and meeting all the people in my first band, except for my keyboard player, there at the ECC, we called it. And we played all of the barn dances every Friday night. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but the Oxbow incidents basically was my first real cover group. And we played at all of the churches, the church dances. So we automatically had maybe 10 jobs a month. But I'm a little ahead of myself.
That's all right. I had the Seagram 7 prior.
Yes, that's where I was going.
Okay.
So I met these cats at the camp, and we all decided, well, let's try and do something, right? And so Brian Dawson, he had a set of drums, and their home was a funeral home. And we cleared all this stuff out, and we practiced there. And our first singer, Paul Tiny Lister, he was a big guy, so everyone called him Tiny. He got us this job at the Harrisville Civic Center in Pasco, Rhode Island for $40 on New Year's Eve. So we called ourselves the Seagram 7. I auditioned people for the gig. And first guy over was a guy named Bob Wiegand, who was kind of a funny looking guy, but he was from my town, and he was a really good drummer for 13. So I said, well, I got one more guy to audition. The next guy came in, was named Ed Riccio, and Ed and I went to high school together. And he wasn't as good a drummer as Bob, but he had a driver's license and a fake ID. So that gave him the nudge over Bob. But while we were practicing, Bob went over to the piano we had in the parlor and started playing all the songs. And I said, holy smokes, you're my piano player. He said, yeah, I took classical lessons for 7 years. And, you know, I'm just starting to play this stuff, even though I'm a drummer. So we hired Bob. So when we got to the gig, there were 7 of us. We called ourselves the Seagram 7. During Wipeout, Ed Riccio couldn't play the beat, but Bob Wiegand could. So Ed got off the drums. Bob went over and played the Wipeout beat. And then we were playing Walk, Don't Run. And I played all the lead parts. I was not so much into rhythm. To me, the purpose of a song was the solo. Not the words, nothing else. Only the solo mattered.
Right.
right? So we're playing Walk Don't Run, and we got into the complex bridge, and so the rhythm guitar player John Holscher, who was a cabin mate of mine from back at the camp, he flipped his amp off and just did whatever. And then when we got back into the do 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 do, then he turned it back on for A minor G F E.
You know what's interesting about the Walk Don't Run? You know how the first band or artist that you heard play it for forever until you find out otherwise, you think that was the original version. So Herb Alpert's version was the first version I ever heard of that.
Oh, that's cute.
Yeah, so I didn't know, he didn't do the original.
No.
And so but in your mind you're thinking, oh wow, because you think of with the Spanish flavor to it and everything like that.
Yeah.
But I'm glad when I found out, that it's the original of that. So yeah, interesting.
So when at the end of that job, I said, okay, I need because we had two lead singers. Brian Dawson, who was the drummer, he could also sing a little bit. So he and Tiny both sang. And I cleaned house afterwards and started the group. And we became the Oxbow Incidents. My sister, Kathy, furnished us the title. And our first real cool job that wasn't a church job was Sigma Nu fraternity at Brown University. Phone rings, I pick it up. Yeah, is this where the Oxbow Incidents are located? I said, yeah. How would you like to play a frat party for $60 on March 21st? I said, sure. And he said, okay, you're done. But get here by 7 o'clock or something. So I hung up and I was ecstatic. And then I thought, oh, this has got to be a joke. So I called the fraternity back and confirmed that it was real. So everybody was excited. We went out and got the Flag Brothers Beatle boots and dungarees, and then wore a powder blue shirt with a black knit tie and a blue blazer. That was our first outfit. Well, we did go to a battle of the bands. The first one, it was in South Providence. It was kind of a rough area, but we only knew like Wipe Out and No Matter What Shape Your Stomach Is In, the Alka-Seltzer commercial, and the Batman theme song. And, it really sucked, but House of the Rising Sun, but we did it. And on the way up to the job, some motorcyclists passed us. Bob's mom was driving us, and they had the patch on the back, ECMF. And you could probably guess what that is, but Bob's mom said, Bobby, what does ECMF stand for? And it's the East Coast Mother Humpers. But he said, oh, Mom, that's the East Coast Motorcycle Fraternity. Said, okay, that's great. So everybody played their thing and at the Battle of the Bands, and Secret Agent Man, Johnny Rivers, was the hit song at the time.
Oh, yeah.
So the last band comes out, and they were called the Untouchables. They all had the pointed black shoes, peg black pants, white ruffled shirts with vests on, with leopard skin vests, and they all wore derbies. And they came out and opened up with Secret Agent Man. And of course we were smoked, and so was everybody else, like the Blues Brothers. Let's smoke these turkeys, but it was a great experience nevertheless. And so,
well, you guys as the Oxbow Incidents, you had quite the following up there in that area of the country.
We were a big regional band for 3.5 years in New England, and we had a heck of a lot of fun. The band finally broke up. Our last job was at the Orchid Room on Valentine's Day in 1969. And I was living in Boston. I saw an ad for the Boston Rock Symphony at EU Wurlitzer's, the local music store. So I called up and I auditioned, and there were 2 chairs. And you think, what's a chair? But They were advertising for an 11-piece rock band to do an around the world tour with Arthur Fiedler and the Boston Pops Orchestra. I got the job, and a guy named Melvin Wax from Long Island, who was a Berkeley student, also was hired. James Montgomery, the blues harmonica player from Detroit, who had moved to Boston, he got on the gig as well. So we practiced for months. Finally, opening day, Symphony Hall, it was April. I went down in the afternoon in my van and set up my 100-watt Marshall stack, got a little bit of a sound, went back to my apartment, put on my tuxedo and left, but the van wouldn't start. So I hitchhiked to Symphony Hall wearing my tuxedo, carrying my guitar. We got there and the place filled up, and that buzz, and you hear the orchestra getting ready and all that stuff. So the curtain opens and they start with this elegant music and everything. And now it's time for the rock band to come in. Well, all of this time, nobody thought it was necessary for us to rehearse with the symphony guys, because they're pros. They just read music and that's it, So we started out, and these 100-watt Marshalls, the violin, their toupees were jumping off. It was just, and they, and they just all stopped playing, and nobody knew what to do. So I said, "Blues Jam in G," and we started into a shuffle, and I kicked off some B.B. King licks, and finally the promoter realized this was a total fiasco, and he power. I could hear my Marshall going out of juice as the last notes faded, died and broke, and the Boston Rock Symphony went up in smoke.
A lot of deaf musicians after that.
Yeah, that's for sure. But that was my first real big time experience. Then I put an all original group together and was working on that. We ran out of money. That was the Deadly Mantis. So I moved down to Provincetown, Mass, P-Town, we called it.
Was that Pale Rider that you're talking
Pale
about?
Rider, yeah.
Okay.
When I went to college, I met a senior named Steve Blodgett, and he had studied or met Doc Watson, and he could finger pick just like unbelievable. So we started hanging out and playing together and gigging and like this. And how was it? My girlfriend Pepper and I were in Cambridge, Harvard Square in Boston. And she met a drummer that she knew, a guy named Charlie Flannery, who was an underclassman of hers, but the grade above me. And she introduced us outside Hung Ups, the bell-bottom store. And we started talking about the cream and everything. And Charlie was, Ginger Baker, this and that. And we said, well, let's start a group. He said, okay. And he knew a guy named David Hayes from Dighton, Mass, whose father was like a captain or something in the Navy. And David had an older brother named Gary. Well, we got Charlie, Dave, me. I got Bob Wiegand, our keyboard player, and we rented a little house in Tiverton, Mass. And we started gigging around. And our last job was at a place called the Phone Booth in Warren, Rhode Island, in the middle of a snowstorm. I mean, it was a blizzard. So one guy came in off the street to get out of the snow, and the waitress was there and the bartender. So I think we were playing for the door, and it was $2.10. So at the end of the night, the waitress came up and on the serving tray and put it down, and there was the $2.10. We did get free beer. So Charlie took what was left of his pitcher of beer and he poured it on the $2.10 and made a speech through the microphone. It was funny. And after that, we were driving through downtown Fall River trying to get something to eat, and a snowplow came down a big street. He couldn't stop, and he hit the front of Dave's car and clipped it off. They were lucky, and they made it back to the crib. So we laid low for a little bit, but then the summer came around, and we got a job at the Barrington Yacht Club, which is where I played a lot in my high school band. So we rode up from the Cape, and we were drunk and probably stoned, and just we opened the door at the yacht club, and we kind of fell out into the parking lot. Well, it turned out it was a double book. Our biggest rival in high school was when I was a sophomore. The senior band was called the Ascots, and they did a lot of Beatles songs and whatnot, and they were double booked to play with us, but they weren't called the Ascots. They were called something else. But Vinny and Teddy Medberry were cousins, and they were on the job. Well, they went into the Raven, where Vinny Medberry's, he just went, Raven, and it was just like freaking everybody out. There was, they wanted, I can't get no satisfaction and Gloria and stuff like that. So the guy who booked the job was actually my old coach in junior high school, Larry Duchesne. He had a bald head, and we called him Bowling Ball. But he came running out to the parking lot, and he said, Howard, get your band in there. Get in there right now. We get to get these guys off the stage. Well, as it turned out, after that gig, Vinny Medberry was driving to California. And Dave Hayes said, you know what? I want to get out of here. Can you give me a ride? And he said, okay. And they went out to California. Dave slept on Mount Tamalpais the first 3 months. Elephant Mountain, if you recall, the Youngbloods' first album, maybe second, but it had the mountain in the back. That was Mount Tamalpais. And Dave got a job playing bass for Jesse Colin Young from the Youngbloods. And so Dave had a couple of bucks, and he moved into an airplane hangar and put a sleeping bag on the floor there. And after a while, they came and toured in Boston and played at Paul's Mall in the Jazz Workshop. Well, Charlie and I went to see him, and there was Dave it was the day when the black satin touring jackets were in, and, Van Morrison, or, Jesse Colin Young, whatever was written on the back. So we said, wow, Dave's made it. Well, when Dave left Jesse, he became Van Morrison's bass player and still plays with him today. Wow. So I ran into him in LA. That's later in the story. The other guy, his cousin, the drummer, Teddy Medberry, it was a New Year's Eve, maybe 1974. He joined a group called The Movies, and they played on the Queen Elizabeth. And I'm, watching with my girlfriend the festivities and whatnot, and I say, "Oh, that's Teddy Medberry." So
you recognized him, yeah?
Yeah, I did. Well, Teddy had a glass eye, and for theatrics, he was not beyond sometime pulling it out and popping it in his mouth. There were some wild guys. What
would have been really fun to do is do like the magician trick with the quarter, take your eye out, and pull it from behind somebody's
ear and pop it.
Yeah, that would have been something. Going back a few years, probably you had quite a few memorable incidents at the Newport Music Festival.
Oh yeah, that's true. In fact, I did a great video on it, but in '64, I heard Count Basie and Ray Charles and Bob Dylan, and in '65 I had a ticket, and I saw Dylan when he first went electric. And he came out in a purple suit with a Stratocaster with the Paul Butterfield Blues Band backing him up. Mike Bloomfield, Harvey Brooks, all of them. And they came out and just played some, I think Leopard Skin Pillbox Hat was his first song. And it was, the PA was horrible, the mix was horrible, and people wanted, it's all over now, baby blue. They started booing, and he went in the next song and booing, and they finally booed him off the stage. And he actually started crying, and he left. And after about 15 minutes, he regained his composure and came back with his Gibson Hummingbird and did all of his acoustic stuff, and the crowd loved it. But that was a historic moment.
You were there. Yeah. How did you feel? Did you feel a little sorry for him, or what?
Yeah, I did. Because, I had heard Highway 61 revisited, and, Tom Thumb's Blues and Highway 61 and the electric stuff. So I was used to that. So I didn't really care what it was. It was just the great Bob Dylan. I was going to see him. So I got to hear his electric attempt that wasn't very good. And then I got to see the folk artist Dylan too. So, and then I also saw Sonny and Cher that afternoon, by the way.
Oh, the same afternoon. Wow.
Same afternoon. It was pretty cool.
Well, fast forward about 4 years, again at Newport, you got to hobnob with guitar royalty, Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck.
Yes. The Boston Tea Party was a famous club. The original Tea Party was on Lansdowne Street, and it was an old church. While that was just starting up, Brown University spring weekend every April had a big rock weekend. And this particular weekend, the Yardbirds were playing. So my band, the Oxbow Incidents, we were all out front waiting for the bus to pull up. And they pulled up, and I introduced myself to Richard Smith, I believe, one of the roadies, right off the bat, and acted as their tour guide. And so I showed him the stage, and the promoter came out, and he said, well, it looks like rain. I think we better move this over to Meehan Auditorium. And the driver, who was in the band, said, well, where's that? And I said, we'll show you, come on. So the whole band got to get on the bus, and we drove about a mile over to the Meehan Auditorium, and we were sitting in the parking lot and getting to know the guys. Hey, I'm Jimmy McCarty, or I'm Keith Relf, I'm Jimmy Page, I'm Chris Treja. And we were just young, up and coming wannabe rock stars with real rock stars, right? Well, we got to, at least I did, sit with Jimmy and Keith in their dressing room. And Magazine was a big rock magazine at the time, and there were pictures of the Cream in there. And actually, Cream, people just say the Cream. My error, my bad. There were pictures of Cream in there, and Eric Clapton was soloing, and he might have been in the middle of something heavy, and he's going. and Jimmy would say, oh, look at those faces he's making. Look at those faces. Anyway, it came time for them to get dressed and go on. So we went out front to catch the show. The closing number was Dazed and Confused, if you can believe it. And of course, it didn't sound anything like with Zeppelin, but I kept in touch. And so when I saw the Jeff Beck group was coming to the Boston Tea Party in October, I bought a ticket. the dogs don't like the rain, and it's starting to rain.
Okay.
So I'm in there, and this is only 6 months later, and I see Richard, the road manager, walking by. I said, Richard. He said, hey, mate, how you doing? I said, I'm great. He said, come backstage and meet the lads. So I said, okay. He says, this is Jeff. I said, Jeff, back up. And this is Rod Stewart and Mick Waller, and here's Ronnie Wood, who was playing bass. And Ronnie was a guitar player, and Jeff needed a bass player, so he said, here, put this on. And he played on the first album. Well, they did their show, and it was awesome. I mean, I was totally floored. But before, that was all during setup. And Don Law, who was running the tea party, he brought in dinner for the band. Well, the opening act was Jethro Tull. So we're all upstairs in the upper balcony of this old church, and people are sitting around eating all this Chinese food. And so I met Ian Anderson and Martin Barr and Clive Bunker and all of Jethro Tull. Well, I became friends with the guitarist, and we exchanged addresses and became pen pals and like that. So they put on an incredible show, and I asked Richard if he'd put me on the guest list for the next night, and he did. And I brought my high school girlfriend. We took a lot of pictures and had a great time. So a little bit of time went on. It became February, and the first Led Zeppelin tour was at the tea party, as part of, that was one of their dates, because in the fall, the first Zeppelin album came out, and, we were just, wow, dazed and confused, and that White Summer and everything. Yeah. So same thing. Richard, the same road manager, was now managing Zeppelin. Same thing. Oh, come back and say hello to Jimmy and Robert and all that. So we went through all that, and I reminded Jimmy that I had met him just 6 months before in the Yardbirds. They were very nice, and it was really cool. And I had pictures of Robert on the stage with my old Nikon matte camera and whatever it was. It was just, it was mind blowing. So there I was, still in the Oxbow incidents, and just ready to do our last job, and just before the Rock Symphony. And I had met two of the greatest guitar heroes of all time. But actually, it was right around Halloween, the same fall of '68, and Cream was on the Goodbye Cream tour. So I couldn't get tickets to the Garden to see their show, but for some reason it got canceled. So I was and rescheduled in Providence, Rhode Island 3 or 4 days later. Well, I was walking around Beacon Street, and there was a nice hippie chick walking my way, and she looked like the perfect flower power hippie girl, right? But she was wearing a jacket, a fringe jacket with a big moon or something on the back. And I recognized it as Eric Clapton's jacket, because it was in I Magazine or Rolling Stone or something. I read the interview and I saw him with the jacket. So I said, hey, I'm Howie McDonald. I'm a guitar player. And she said, oh, I'm Anna or whatever. And she said, I balled Clapton last night, and I was so good, he gave me his jacket. I said, really? I said, wow, that's fascinating. I said, well, I got a doobie. Do you want to smoke it? She said, sure. So we smoked it. It's about 9 o'clock, and, the traffic is starting to move through down Beacon Street. And we were on a corner, and there was just like a little patch of grass there. And all of a sudden she said, shh, my little baby girl here likes me to hold her during the thunder.
You know what? That my dog does too. We have a Labradoodle,
Uh-huh.
and he freaks out with the thunder bad.
Yeah.
He wants to get out. I mean, he just wants to get somewhere safe,
Yeah.
So,
Right.
yeah,
And
he's always.
you can feel them kind of shaking next to your heart, you know.
That's right. That's
Uh,
why, I heard that it's not so much the sound, but their coat. It kind of vibrates.
well, there's electromagnetic static electricity in the air, so they're highly sensitized. Uh, anyway, the girl, to make a long story short, there, she said, I want you to do me. I said, right here. And she took Clapton's jacket off and put it on that little part of grass and stripped off, and I stripped off, and we did it. And then it was time to go. I said, nice meeting you. So anyway, the Cream were doing their last show at the Garden. It was canceled. And so I went and saw them at the Rhode Island Auditorium, which was the old Rhode Island Reds professional hockey team's arena. So not built for sound at all. Well, during Ginger Baker's 12-minute drum solo of Toad, I went around the back of the stage, and there was Eric Clapton sitting behind his Marshall stack that said Cream on it, smoking a Camel, and I introduced myself and started talking to him. And I asked him about Blind Faith, because all the rumors were he was going to start a band with Stevie Winwood and Rick Gretsch and whatnot. And but in those days, you would never divulge what's coming next. It was like the kiss of death for an artist. He said, Stevie Winwood? I don't even know Stevie Winwood. And then like 6 months later, the album comes out, right?
Yeah.
So within an 8-month period, I had met my 3 greatest guitar heroes, Beck, Clapton, and Page. And I had met Hendrix in the Village in '65 when I was 15 on one of my unsupervised weekends. So then the festival of all festivals, the 1969, normally it's the Newport Jazz Festival, but the promoter said it's going to be the Newport Rock and Pop and Jazz Festival. And they had the cream of all the British bands, Alvin Lee and Jeff Beck and Jimmy Zeppelin, and just everybody. But they had Blood, Sweat, and Tears and Roland Kirk, and just they really mixed it up. So I was there all 3 days, and Jimmy Page came in on a Friday. They were going to close the festival on Sunday, but Jimmy wanted to get the feel of it because he knew it was a big festival. So I'm walking around backstage, and first I ran into Jeff, and I said, hey, is Rod here? And he said, yeah, he's in the dressing room over here. Go say hi to him. So I went in and said hi to him and Ronnie Wood, and they were teasing their hair. They had a lot of hairspray. They're giggling like a couple of girls. And then the door opens, and in walks David Clayton Thomas. And, he had no hair, and he was kind of a big guy. And he looked totally out of place, like a mattress salesman coming in or something. And they turned their hairspray on him and like sprayed him out of the room. So he retreated. So I said, you know what, guys, I'm going to get some air. I'll see you have a great set. So I'm out walking around, and lo and behold, I bumped into Jimmy Page, and he's there holding his Les Paul, and he put it down. He said, hey, man, you got any downs? I said, no, I don't have any downs, Jimmy. I got a joint if you want to smoke it, some Mishmacon. He said, yeah, let's do it. So we stood there and we're smoking it. And after about 8 minutes, he kind of, if you've ever been on an acid trip and you're way out there and you do a doobie, it kind of just, okay, my feet are on the ground now. And then up walks Jeff Beck with his gold top around his neck. He says, oh, hey, Jimmy. And Jimmy says, hey, Jeff. And so Jimmy felt obliged to take out his red Sunburst Les Paul at 59. So Jeff says, Jimmy, you seen this lick? And he goes, you know, and Jimmy says, yeah, but what about this? And Jimmy would fire back a lick, and then Jeff would do some pull-offs like on Jeff's Boogie or something, and then go all the way up the neck. And Jimmy would play something like Out of Dazed and Confused. And Jeff came back and did something, and Jimmy was like, he took off his Les Paul. He handed it to me. He said, you play. And he just sat down. So Jeff just continued, and he said, how about this one? And I played like the best lick I knew. And I was like, no, this can't even be happening. Yeah. And so I said, I think that's probably enough. Let's get this guitar back in the game. You know, when you first learn stuff off a record, because that's all we had, you know, it would be attack the record player, and you'd put the needle back like 300 times. What was that lick? How did he do it? You know, cassette tapes were a little bit more helpful in that respect. But Jethro Tull was also at the festival. Johnny Winter and BB King at that Newport festival. So BB did a great set. Johnny did an incredible set. And then they were both going to jam together. Well, I went backstage, and I went to Johnny's dressing room and told him I was from Orange, and about his drummer going to school with my cousin and all this. And he said, oh, guitar player. And he was playing a Fender Mustang. He said, here, try mine. And literally the strings were this far off the fret. Really? So you had to have like steel driving hands just to bend a note. I mean, it was unbelievably tough. It was also really set up for slide playing too, but he had enough power in his fingers and hands where he could handle that heavy gauge of string. Yeah. So I said, all right, I'm going to go get out front and check your set out. He said, cool. Then BB played, and they announced Johnny Winter is going to jam with BB King in 20 minutes. And so Jimmy Page, Robert Plant, Alvin Lee, and a couple of other dudes, we all went down and got in a row of chairs and sat together. And on my left was Jimmy, and then Robert and Alvin. And they said, who do you think's going to come out on top? And Robert said, BB will kill him. And Jimmy said, I don't know. Let's wait and see. And boy, they came out, and just to watch BB King playing with Johnny Winter, sitting with Jimmy Page, Alvin Lee, and Robert Plant. Yeah. And I'm 19.
Right.
So I always had heard that if you want to do something or become something, you hang around with the people who you want to be like, and you do what they do. And so I got the clothes and had the attitude and was hanging out. So in my mind, there was no doubt that I was going to be a great, famous guitar player. And even when I wasn't, I presented myself that I would, and eventually I was. Then somewhere along the line, I'm down in Provincetown, and Pale Rider had a volume 2 because Bobby Wiegand went off somewhere. We reformed the band, played around, and eventually that broke up. And I was just sitting around with my girlfriend, and I got a phone call from a guy named Steve Jablecki, who had been in a group called the Mojo Hands. Now, when I was in the Oxbow Incidents, we always saw the Mojo Hands playing at Merrill's Lounge. Now, this was a bar. We'd only played colleges, and the frat parties, they would have a keg, and everyone's drunk and puking and running around in their underwear and crazy stuff like that. But but we never played any bars because we weren't old enough. but Jablecki looked old enough. So his group, I think Denny Casino, some other guys. So I knew who he was. He called me up and he said, I'm in a band now. It's called the Wadsworth Mansion.
There you go. Yes, yes.
Right. And we've got a hit record called Sweet Mary, I'm Coming Home. And the producer said we need a real heavy guitar player songwriter, and your name came up. So I said, well, drive down here and we'll spend an afternoon together and we'll see if we vibe together. So he showed up on the designated date and he came in and I got out my acoustic and we started playing, and we wrote a song called something like, we gotta have a good time floating in, ain't no much but it ain't a sin, oh can you feel it? And I said, okay, we got a song out of this, I'll join. So he said, okay, great. We're about to start recording the next album, and we're recording at the Ed Sullivan Studios in New York, and we'll pick you up. So at that time, his brother Mike was playing the drums. Now and a guy named John Poole was playing the bass. One of my first church jobs, I met a girl named Karen Poole, really cute. And she was John Poole's younger sister.
Wow.
Well, so she introduced me to John, said that he plays music. And actually, John and Mike and a guy named Rick Silva, and I had a jam session at Rick Silva's house, probably in '64, sometime around there. But at any rate, I get in the mansion and I know the other two guys. I know Mike Jablecki and John Poole. So, okay, let's rehearse. We rehearsed a little bit and we drove up to New York City. We're at the Ed Sullivan studio and I met the producers, Jimmy Calvert and Norman Marzano. Now, Norman was in a group called the Trade Winds, and they had a song called New York's a Lonely Town.
Yes. Yes.
And another guy from Rhode Island named Vinnie Poncia was the star of that. Well, Vinnie actually produced the Ringo album years later, and he let Jimmy Calvert play on one of the Ringo's rhythm guitar on one of the Ringo songs. I would have liked to have played on that album, but it wasn't time. So anyway, we played the 4 songs. They sounded great. And in the middle of the session, a beautiful buxom blonde came in and is hanging out in the control room. So she latched on to Steve. And when we were done, we went back to the hotel. And there was, those were the days where that have 2 maybe double beds in one room, 1 double bed in the other room, and all of the roadies and everybody else slept on the couches and the floor and whatnot. So John and Steve, being the most senior guys, they were sharing the room. So I went to bed and the girl was in there with Steve, and she wore him out, and so then she jumped on John and she wore him out, and John said, next room down the hall. And she came in and she wore me out, and then I don't know what happened to her after that. Well, I had a deal with my girlfriend down on the Cape, and she said, look, I know you're a musician and I know you get groupies and all this stuff. She said, so all I ask is don't do anybody in town here. Out of town, I don't care. Nobody in town. I said, okay, fine. So this was Jane Mead. And she had a friend named Albert Corliss, who was the bouncer at the Atlantic House, the A House, a big after hours nighttime spot there on the Cape, not too far from our place. Well, Albert met this girl who happened to be the beautiful buxom blonde who came and just happened to be in P-Town. So I'm sure she went home with Albert. And the next day, I'm playing my guitar, was what I do all day long. I play about 11 hours a day in those days. And we hear the door knock, and Jane and I went to the door and opened the door, and there's Albert and there's the girl. And Albert says, Jane, this is Anna, or whatever her name was, and Howie, this is Anna. And the first thing out of her mouth was, oh, I know you. You umped me in New York City. And I just started laughing. I said, Jane, I was out of town. I didn't know she was going to come to town. But Jane was cool about it.
It was out of town.
Yeah. But, you know, it blew my mind. I mean, what are the odds, right?
Right.
So we started touring around and playing coliseums and stuff like that. Well, shortly after,
was that were you with them when you toured with Alice Cooper?
Alice Cooper and Edgar Winter,
Yeah.
they did a 35 state tour opening up for them. And after that tour, they were playing the Providence Civic Center, and Steve Jablecki and I went over to see Alice and Neil, his drummer. They were sharing a room. And there was an empty case of Budweiser all stacked up, and they each had pellet guns and were sitting in their beds shooting over the stacks of stuff. You know, when you're on the road, people get a little stir crazy. But we were playing coliseums, and it was the first time I had played a coliseum was with that band. And it's funny because, you know, there's a bunch of lights. It's pretty dark out there, and it's like an ocean of people. Yeah. And the waves, it's like being on a boat at night, and you can sort of see white caps or something. So you kind of see people, and you hear this sound echoing all around. Well, before we did the recording at the Ed Sullivan studio, we rehearsed at Studio Instrument Rentals in New York City. There's one in New York and LA, and that's where all of the big bands would rehearse. They have studio stages of all size. Well, we're on the band, and I'm hearing right up the stairs, because we're on the back stairway just chilling, and I hear this incredible music coming from the next floor. I said, that's the group I want to be in. And so I walked up the stairs and talked to one of the roadies. I said, who is that? And they said, oh, that's Edgar Winter with Jerry LaCroix rehearsing for what became the Roadwork album. And that 12-minute version of Tobacco Road and Save the Planet and all this stuff. It was great. So where were we? We were off on tour, and shortly after I had been in the band, maybe 3 months, Mike Jablecki decided he wanted to go back to college and become a businessman, and he had had enough of this fooling around music stuff. So I got my friend Charlie Flannery, who was in the group Pale Rider, and I said, I got a guy. So we set up an audition, 2:00 at the Wadsworth Mansion in the practice room. And this was a 3 or 4 level mansion. And so many of the rooms were rented out to other people, some groupies, some other people. And they all packed in and were crowded around the room when Charlie auditioned. And of course, Charlie got the job. This is Charlie right here next to me.
That's
And
you.
then here's Steve Jablecki over here. And I think this is Mike Messier, our roadie, and Mike Jablecki, and then John Poole, the bass player.
Oh,
If,
okay.
if I'm
Hold
seeing
that up, hold that up to the screen a little closer. There we go. And then to your right.
okay. Oh, sorry.
There we go. There we go. So we can get a better look of. There we go. All right. Hold it right there just for a few seconds. Yeah, that's a nice pick. Nice picture.
Yeah, that was up in Vermont we were playing. And my sister had a place nearby, so we detoured and went over there to see her. And we took a bunch of pictures, like holding chickens and throwing them up in the air, and things like that. It was pretty cool.
Well,
So Charlie's in the band, and we're off, and we were doing a Southern tour.
uh-huh.
Well, actually, before the Southern tour, we were doing a New England, New Jersey, Delaware, that section of the upper East Coast. And we were staying at the Red Bull Inn. I remembered because they had a pack of cards with Red Bull Inn on it. Charlie went down to the car to get a pack of cigarettes. And there was a hot looking girl there, and she asked him for a light, and they got to talking, and he said, well, why don't you come up to my room in a little bit? And she said, okay. Well, about 20 minutes later, Charlie's there all anxious and everything, and he doesn't hear anything. So, and no knock on the door. So he got out and walked next door and to John's room, hey, John, have you seen? And there's the girl. Well, Charlie said, I thought you loved me. But anyway, she had a good time with John and went in with Charlie. But she didn't want any more, and the next thing I hear is Charlie burst into my room. He said, that crazy chick pulled a knife on me. I said, well, you probably deserved it, Charlie.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I think so.
Right. So anyway, on one of our tours down south, we landed in New Orleans, and we had a crossover before we got a little plane to Alexandria or something. Well, John Poole, the bass player, had a prescription for Reds or Tuinol, so some kind of barbiturate. And he talked Charlie into wheeling him around the airport in a wheelchair for like 3 Reds. So Charlie took him, and John was pretending he was handicapped, and Charlie was rolling them all around. And so it finally came time to go through the plane boarding for the next hop, and Steve Jablecki put his guitar up on the conveyor belt, and sometimes he wouldn't say the brightest things. The attendant there said, what's in this case? And Steve said, a bomb. And I thought, Steve, wrong time for Jablecki. Yeah. just dead wrong, pal. So after a minor commotion, he opened it up and produced the guitar and went off on our tour. That was good. We got late into maybe August, and we heard that there was a hurricane, Agnes, coming.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought, well, we're just stoned hippies, and we're going up to Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and who cares? We're leaving it in the rearview mirror. So we got up to Wilkes-Barre, and we played our first night, and it was great. We woke up the next morning, and all these National Guard trucks are pouring into the parking lot and using it as a staging unit. And we said, what's going on? And they said, well, the hurricane caused flooding. It's overflowed the banks of the Susquehanna River.
the whole town is flooding across the river where your club was and all that. That's all underwater and under mud. And we said, can we hitch a ride with you? And they said, yeah, sure. And so we got downtown to the edge of where the water was. And we jumped out, we climbed on a building and we got on the roof. Nobody was there. So we looked over across the Susquehanna, and where our stuff was, it was just, way underwater. So we hitched a ride back to the hotel, and Steve Jablecki and Mike Messier, one of the roadies, said, we'll stay here with the truck and you guys all go back to the mansion in the van and we'll see if we can salvage anything. And they couldn't. It was all mud. So we lost everything. And the band kind of hit the skids. So I went, I had nothing. So I went back to P-Town and I started, the only real job I ever had was washing dishes at some restaurant. And I made it to about day 4. And I just said, I can't do this. So somehow I got enough money to go up to a pawn shop in Central Square, and I bought a 55 Strat with a maple neck for $300. And John Poole and Charlie and I started a trio called Choker, and we were playing all around Boston, and we did maybe 4 nights with Jeremy Spence and the Children. Jeremy Spence was the slide player for Fleetwood Mac.
Yes, he was. Yeah,
right. And they were playing at the Whiskey in LA on a 3-night thing. And on the second night, during the break, Jeremy, he was tripping. He walked across the street and ran into the Children of God, and they started talking to him, and he became one of the Children. He never went back. Never, called the band a few days later, said, I quit, I'm out.
That's right. The cult. Yeah.
So we were playing Katie's in Kenmore Square. And at this time, we were also friends with Aerosmith, who was trying to get a deal in Boston. And Charlie knew Sib Haitian, who was Boston's drummer.
Right.
And he lived up in Lynn, Mass, and had a big place right on the shore there. So we went to a big LSD party at his house, and everybody was just, tripping like mad. And finally, about 2 a.m, we had enough. Charlie and his girlfriend, Kathy, were there. They said, we're going for a swim. And I said, I think I'll drive back to the Cape. And it was like a 2.5, 3-hour drive. I drove home. But I met Sib from Boston, and that was cool.
Yeah. He passed away, a couple of years ago, didn't he?
That's absolutely true.
That's
Shame. They were a great group. So
very tight. Yeah. Yeah.
So leaving out a couple of stories, because there are always dozens, but Steve called me from the coast, and Calvert and Marzano, they said, everything's happening in Hollywood now. Yeah. So Steve bought a house out in the valley, North Hollywood. And he said, look, I'll send you a plane ticket. You come out here 6 months, we'll put a group together. They'll get us a new deal, make a new record, and then you can keep your residence on the Cape and we'll just tour. So I said, fine. Well, my friend, the finger picking Steve Blodgett, rode with me. And we're flying out, and the captain says, now look down on your right, you'll see the Grand Canyon. And we looked down, and sure enough, he said, I'm going to just take a circle around it here for a minute so you all can see it really good. And we had a great view of it. So then maybe an hour later, he says, now we're coming into Los Angeles. And everybody looked down, and all we could see was an orange cloud.
Yeah.
Because that was when people were taking smog pills and stuff like that. The cloud inversion layer trapped it all in. Well, Steve had a nice house, and Mike Messier, one of the roadies, was out there, and his wife Brenda. Well, the musicians contact service on Santa Monica Boulevard was the place that you would go and look for musicians. And you'd register with them. You'd put your name on a 5x7 card. You'd say what you're looking for, bass and drums, and leave your number. So we went through a lot of folks. The first drummer we got was Bobby Zamora, who played with Reuben and the Jets. And that was a Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention spinoff. And Bobby was Mexican, and he had a great Latino kind of beat. We did one or two songs that I had written, one called Seagulls Flying, that it just had a tremendous kind of Latin feel. Well, when it came time, we were taping. The producers were taping all the practices, and they said, Bobby's great on the Latin stuff, but he doesn't have the rock chops. Keep looking. So we found Dave Atwood, who was the first drummer for America, Horse with No Name. And David played in the studio and like that, and he was good. So we went in the studio and we went in with Dave, and we did Dreams, Reality, or Hold On to Your Dreams, that I re-recorded with Steve Perry years later in 75, 76, actually. Steve Perry and I met in 75. And another one called It's Over. But when we got to Hold On to Your Dreams, Dave Atwood just couldn't get it. So the producers called, time out. We're taking a 2-hour break. You go down to Studio Instrument Rentals and see if you can find a drummer. So I got in the car and drove over to SIR, and I walked into one of the big sound stages, like where Deep Purple would rehearse or something like this. And there's a guy building the sound stage, a carpenter. And I said, hey, man, I'm looking for a drummer to do a session right now. Do you know anybody? He said, yeah. I said, great. Who is it? He said, me. I said, well, who are you? He said, I'm Ron Bushy from the Iron Butterfly.
Oh, okay.
The Iron Butterfly? And in 68, I was at like pot parties at college, and we were listening to Inagata DeVita with the black light on, along with Steve Miller's Children of the Future. I said, this is unbelievable. I said, can you go right now? I said, how much will you charge? He said, $15 a side. He was making $275 banging nails. And so on the way over to the studio, I started talking about his career with the Iron Butterfly. And I said, gosh, what's the most you ever made? He said, we made $80,000 playing in Honolulu, one song, 30 minutes, Inagata DeVita. I said, wow. So what are you doing as a carpenter? He said, well, bad real estate investments and a lot of drugs. I said, oh man, that's terrible. So we went in the studio, first take, he nailed it. I drove him back to SIR and got his name and his phone number because I wanted to stay in touch with him. And at a subsequent later date, I went out to his place, and I think we were both tripping. And he had the gigantic Anvil Road case that said, Ron Bushy, Iron Butterfly. But, you know, your eyes kind of are doing this. And it said, Iron Bushy Fly. What? Anyway, back to the session. We mixed up the songs, and it was late. And Steve and I were went through Laurel Canyon, went over Mulholland Drive into the valley, and out of nowhere, there's this redhead hitchhiking, and we picked her up, and I mean, she was probably 24, beautiful, long red hair, just an incredible body, drop dead gorgeous. And she said, I just got thrown out of my house. I got no place to go. Steve said, well, you can come stay with us. So we got back to the house and we said, we just recorded these songs. You want to hear them? She said, sure. So Steve said, well, I got the player in the bedroom, so let's go in there. So he puts the tape on, and I mean, within 30 seconds, the girl was naked, and they were going at it. And on about the third song, I was naked. We were going at it, and at the end of it, we took a line out of the Beatles. I hope we passed the audition.
Right.
But she ended up moving in for a while, and then more girls moved in, and they worked at like receptionists at record companies and things like that. So they knew everybody coming in and out. And there was a very nice black lady named Monica, and she said, oh, Bonnie Bramlett was in today, and she's looking for a guitar player, and she's playing at the Palomino Club, where Linda Ronstadt and the Stone Ponies and some of the Eagles and stuff broke out of in the North Hollywood area. So I called her up and she said, yeah, come here for rehearsal. And I met her and we rehearsed, and maybe twice. And then it was gig night, and I showed up in a red velvet suit with a black shirt and a shag haircut. And she and Delaney had just finished Delaney and Bonnie and Friends and was playing with Eric Clapton. So she kept looking at me and saying, you remind me of someone. You remind me of someone, insinuating Clapton. So we get out there and we did Since I Met You, Baby. And she sang Since I Met You, Howie McDonald. My life will never be the same. So we stayed in touch, and many years later, there's an Allman Brothers story associated with that, but we're on the Wadsworth Mansion today. So Steve and I, then we had the tapes and whatnot, but we didn't really have any gigs. Well, our first gig was, I think, I forget the name of the place, but Steely Dan had played there the night before, and the place was packed. And we played there, and there was maybe 45 people. So we were going through some hard times, and some days would scrape together enough money or Coke bottles, and we'd go to Jack in the Box, and we could buy one Jack burger and split it. It's tough when you just go to a new state with no job or anything. But we eventually, by November, we got booked at the Whiskey. Mm-hmm. And on the strength of our tapes, a guy named Michael Phoebus from GRT Recording Company came out and saw the band. Mm-hmm. And on that show, Rob Roberti was our drummer, and Leah Santos, fabulous singer. They had come out from Long Island. And Leah knew Kathy McDonald, who took over in Big Brother and the Holding Company after Janis. So she was a Bay Area legend, and she had an album out on Capitol Records called Insane Asylum. So, and then Eddie Rodriguez, conga player, who Rob and Leah knew from Long Island, who had also come out. If Rob couldn't make a gig, then Eddie would fill in. And he was a really good singer too. So we're at the Whiskey. We got the deal. Michael Phoebus offered us a deal. And so we were all just ecstatic finally. Our bass player was a guy named Skip Perkins, and he was in the Navy on Okinawa with Gary Hayes, Dave Hayes, my former bass player's brother.
Wow. Okay.
So I'm
It's a small world, yeah.
throughout 55 years, you wouldn't believe how many things intertwine.
Yeah.
Well, we used to play up on the Sunset Strip, up from the whiskey before we got our whiskey date at a place called Bill Gazzari's. And Bill was famous for having a $100 prize for the dance contest and whatnot. But he had 3 stages and would always have 3 bands. So the first band would play, and at least a half a dozen times we played. The next band that played was Van Halen. And,
Okay.
and then we'd play. Well, they did strictly covers,
Mhm.
and they would end up with LaGrange.
It's easy.
And we knew LaGrange. So what we'd do is they're in the end where Billy Gibbons is all these pinched harmonics, and then we'd start up and start playing along with them. And then Eddie and I would get into a guitar battle. And then we'd meet, the first band would come back on, we'd go out behind Jack's liquor store and would drink or smoke, or they I think oftentimes drunk, put some speed in a Jack Daniels bottle, but we had a great time and we got to know each other decently well. In fact, they had a softball game out at their house in Pasadena once a month, and my girlfriend Cece and I went out there on one of those softball games too.
Well, talk a little bit about the nascent Van Halen. Were they a lot rawer back then, in the early days? And was
David Lee and
David Lee the showman that he became, or what were they like in the early days?
So David Lee was a wild man then, and he couldn't sing, but he had a couple of screams and squawks and a couple of taekwondo moves. So he was a pretty good showman. I'd rate him a 5 as a singer, but his tricks and antics got him across. Well, they did not do any originals, and we were on a break at the time. And I said, Eddie, how come you guys don't do any originals? Do you have any? And he said, yeah, we're working some up, but we're not going to play them until we're ready to debut as an all original band. And I said, okay, cool. That makes sense. But they did Rocky Mountain Way, and Eddie had one of those magic bags, the voice box where it had the tube, and he did the like Peter Frampton did in something.
Yeah.
And they did Star Trippin', or I think, or Space Truck, or whatever it was called, the Deep Purple song at the time. And they probably did something by Iron Maiden, but they were all hard rock covers, basically. And they were just as wild. Michael Anthony was very quiet. Whenever we hung out, he almost was not even there, kind of the invisible man kind of thing. And Alex Van Halen, he was really vocal and fun. And what I realized when they first came out, when I saw them down at the Starwood, which was another big club that we were playing at, my girlfriend Cece and I went there to see a group called Straw Dog, and we saw Hubie Hurd in his kind of disco suit, sitting on the steps, kind of stretched out. And she said, that's Hubie Hurd. He plays with Billy Preston. And that's when Billy had 3 keyboard players, Hubie, Tinny Lupper, and himself. And they did the Will It Go Round in Circles and a few other songs before that. I introduced myself to Hubie, told him I was a guitar player, and he said, man, I'm thinking about putting a group together. Give me your number. And so we did. We created a group called Silver, Platinum, and Gold that was half of Ike and Tina's band, half of Billy Preston's band, and me as the white token Jimi Hendrix guitar player. But they were great guys and great singers and so much fun. Van Halen, I was there with another guitar player, friend of mine, Peter Glindeman. I think maybe my drummer, Rob. And Eddie came out, and all of a sudden he's dive bombing and tapping and whammy barring and pinched harmonics. That triggered noise he made, like the horse neighing, and and my buddy Pete Glindeman said he didn't play a legitimate note all night. It was all just tricks and noise. But Ted Templeman on a tip went down there. Rodney Binghamheimer, who used to play the records up at Guitarist, called Ted Templeman. First, he called Gene Simmons, who produced a small demo on him that didn't do anything. And then Ted Templeman came and heard him, and then he called the president of Warner Brothers Records, said, we're going to sign this group. I think it was Mo Austin. They came the next night and saw him and signed him. You know, the rest is rock and roll history there.
And you mentioned a little bit ago about recording with Steve Perry. At the time that you met him, recorded, could you see potential if he was placed with the right backing band that he would really go places?
Absolutely. I used to go to the Songwriters Showcase, John Braheny and Bones Howe and a bunch of other BMI guys and stuff. And they said, if you're going to make it, you need a music business attorney. Yeah. And so I got a reference, a guy named Andy Stern. Called him up. I gave him $100 retainer to go in and talk with him one day. And I told him what I was looking for, a great lead singer. And he said, well, there was a guy in here yesterday with Steve Cropper. His name's Steve Perry, and he's looking for a band or a project. I said, oh, can you hook us up? He says, well, let me call him and see if it's okay to give him your number. And he called him, and Steve said, sure. So I made plans to drive out to his mom's house, and it was a good bit. And he was a drummer at the time. He was a singing drummer. And we got out there, and I had maybe 12 club songs to play, like All Right Now and maybe Taking Care of Business or whatnot, you know. And Steve sang every one of them. And as we were playing through it, I said, man, this guy's good. We did a few more. I said, wow, this guy is really good. And by the time we finished, I said, man, this dude is like got it over Robert Plant. Yeah. So I said, all right, well, I want to do some recording. I've got a bunch of songs to choose from. Are you interested? And he said, yeah. So on another date, he came over to my apartment, and I played him maybe 10 songs. Stronger and Stronger, Dreams Reality was one, and It's Over, which I had just recently written after studying at the Dick Grove Conservatory of Music and Howard Roberts Guitar Institute of Technology. I was on his first class. And then another one he wanted to do called Any Way You Want It.
Oh, okay.
So I said, I'm doing an Asian tour for 3 months. And when I come back, we'll record it. He said, okay, great. Well, we rehearsed on up to it. We went to the movies together and saw All the President's Men. And we were kind of hanging out. And then I went to Asia for 3 months on a tour and came back and said, hey, I'm ready. He said, okay, great, I'm ready. So I found a studio, Star Trek studio, and we booked it. And he said, just one thing. I said, what's that? He said, I don't want to record Any Way You Want. I said, well, okay, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. We could probably get a deal on the basis of that. Well, we're in the studio, and I had Hubie Hurd on the organ. I had a guy named Robin, who was the drummer for the New Birth, who did Wildflower.
Yeah.
Sweet and gentle flower.
Oh, that's a great track. Yeah, great.
Right. Somehow we hooked in with the New Birth, LTD, and Earth, Wind, and Fire. And they used to come out to our rehearsal place and jam for 5 or 6 hours and would only stop for a handful of peanuts or a beer or something like that. We were tight. And one of these songs, It's Over, I said he'd be good for it. So I had an all-star cast, Mark Levine, my roommate, who played bass on Johnny Rivers' Slow Dancing to the Music. That was the first gold record he played on it. Then he played with Barry Manilow for the next 28 years or something. And that's a whole lot of stories. I've got on my YouTube channel, I've got an interview with Mark Levine, and he tells a lot of great stories about Stevie Wonder and Dionne Warwick and all this stuff. So we're in the studio, and Robin he wasn't playing right. And I also had Tony Carey, my friend Tony Carey, who was in Blackmore's Rainbow. And he just on the first, Richie Blackmore from Deep Purple, his first solo project was Rainbow. And Tony was the keyboard player on the first album. So I had a lot of incredible players there. I might have even had Bobby Zinner, guitar player in the group I was in called The Force. Because when you're in LA, you're in about 3 or 4 bands at once, because you never know what's going to take off. So you play with everybody you can, whenever you can. I even did a Sunday night gig with Nolan Porter, who did an R&B song called Nolan Porter. So we're in the studio, we're recording, and Robin's not cutting it. So I kicked him out. I called Rob Roberti, and Rob came over and played the track to Hold On to Your Dreams, Stronger and Stronger, because he had been playing it in the band with me and Jablecki. That was one of our songs. So I was always curious to why Steve didn't want to record any way you wanted. And a lot of people, after I did my story about who's the best rock singer I ever worked with, Steve Perry, of course, I told this story, and a lot of people are saying, well, are you saying that you wrote Any Way You Want It, that Steve wrote with Neil Schon? And I said, no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I presented a song that had the same lyrics as the chorus to that song, and it had the same music part to Stronger and Stronger that chorus was put on, and then all the rest was different. So possibly subconsciously, I had a little something to do with maybe of that seed growing into the $9 million flower that it became. I didn't see a cent of it, but I don't care. You know, I play music for me, and I don't do it for money. So I do it for the love of music. But at any rate, we were in there, and the band left, and Steve and I are in the control booth. And this one song, It's Over, is an unbelievably pretty ballad. And Steve and I did 28 takes of it.
Right is right, wrong is wrong. Before the night is sure I'll be gone.
It was really, I mean, it's a classic song. People write me all the time and say, you and Steve should re-record that. Basically, when the songs were all mixed and it was time to go, and I had some record labels interested, I called them up and he said, well, I just joined a new band called Journey. Yeah. So I'm not available anymore. I said, okay.
It's all in the timing, yeah.
Yeah, timing's everything. It was 4 years in LA without taking a break to see any of my family. So after 4 years, I flew down to Tuscaloosa, Alabama. My dad had a farm there. He was teaching at the University of Alabama. And I just kind of de-stressed there, and we're planting potatoes and stuff. And he said, what do you want to do tomorrow? I said, drive me up to Muscle Shoals. He said, He said, "What's up there?"
Yeah.
I said, "Well, there's a lot of recording up there that's just incredible." Dwayne Allman, one of my idols, who I met a couple of times and even played my guitar on the Whipping Post solo at the Boston Tea Party. That's another story I just sort of glazed over with the Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, and all that. But Boss Skaggs did Somebody Loaned Me a Dime. And there's a really nice solo on there played by Dwayne. So we got in the car the next day, we're driving up there, and he said, "When we get there, how are we going to know where to go?" And I said, "Well, stop at a music store and I'll ask them where the studios are."
Right.
He said, "Okay." So we pulled into the Sheffield Mall. I found the Peaches record store. And I asked the guy, where's it all at? And he took out a piece of yellow legal pad and he drew like a square. And he said, "Well, we're right here. You go out the door and go straight up this road here. And about 300 yards on your left will be Fame Studio." And I said, "Oh, okay. I've heard of Fame." That's where a lot of recording was going on. So then he said, "Now, if you go to the end of the street, turn left, and then come back this way, on your left will be Wishbone Studio." And that's Clayton Ivey's studio. And Clayton was a great session piano player. He opened his own studio. And then he said, "Now, if you get down to the end here, you'll hit Jackson Highway, and that's Muscle Shoals Sound." I said, "Oh, where the Swampers are." I said, "Okay." So right at that probably moment, the band was cutting the track to Old Time Rock and Roll.
Okay. Okay.
All right. So I come up here and go into Fame and leave them all my contact stuff. And Rick Hall wasn't there at the moment. I went over and talked to Clayton at Wishbone. All of that took about a half an hour by the time I pulled up at Muscle Shoals Sound. The band had finished and they left on a lunch break because it was lunchtime. So I came up to the back door and I might have talked to Carol Butkus, the receptionist, and she got Jimmy Johnson, rhythm guitar player and producer. And he said, "Yeah, what can I do for you?" And I said, "Well, I'm Howie McDonald. I'm from LA. There's a bunch of albums I played on and records. And what does it take to play on a record here?" And he thought to himself, "Normally I'd tell this guy where to go, and that's where the sun don't shine." He said, "But there was something about this kid." So I said, "You got your guitar with you?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, go get it." And he said, "Plug in, tune up, plug in." And he said, "We just cut this track and play along with it. And when I give you the nod, give us a solo and then just play fills to the end." I said, "Okay." So it started off and I hear da, 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 da. And then again, and I played a little solo and it left. And later in an interview with the Swampers, when they were being asked about that, Jimmy said, "Yeah, this kid came up and there was something about it." So I said, "I'm going to give him a try." And he could play. He could play. So that was maybe August, because when I got to the Memphis airport, which is where I flew out of, I read in the paper that Elvis Presley had died that week. I put my guitar in the conveyor belt and off it went. When I got back to LA, guitar didn't show up. There was some guy in the back said, "Oh, this is good." So I got some money for it, but that wasn't the point. Anyway, 2 months went by and the phone rings and, "Yeah, this is Carol Butkus from Muscle Shoals Sound. And we need your union number so Capitol Records can send you a check for the song you played on, Old Time Rock and Roll. It's coming out on Bob Seger's Stranger in Town album. And we need to get you paid." right here, this bad boy.
There it is. Yeah, there it is.
At the time I got this, it was over 9 million.
Wow.
And it's now diamond because it's gone much further than that. Well, I thought, all right, I'm trying to get some sessions here in LA, and when this record comes out, it's really going to help me out. So it came out the same time that Rolling Stones came out with the Miss You album. I went to the record store, I bought it. I was so excited. I opened it up. I'm looking for my name on there. And it said, thanks to the Muscle Shoals rhythm section. I was like crushed.
It just said that.
Yeah. Because
you were part of them.
Bob's manager didn't know who had played the solo on it. But when Bob's greatest hits came out, they actually did list Howie McDonald guitar.
They gave you credit. Okay, good.
And they gave me credit. And let's see. Sorry for the screen glare. I do.
Yeah, it's a little glare, but I think we can kind of. Yeah, I see it. Yeah. Howie McDonald. Yep.
And then not too long ago, I don't feel like getting it off the wall, but you can see up here at Bob's ultimate hits.
Yeah.
That would that's the old time rock and roll, turned out to be Seger's biggest song. And the band, they hated it, but they were on tour in Germany. And Bob said, oh, let's close the show with this old time rock and roll. And they did. And they were at the first chorus and everybody was singing it.
Yeah.
And they said, holy smokes, this might be something. And it became a major something. In fact, when the Voyagers compiling the stuff to send out NASA to the stars, interstellar guitar player right here.
There we I see the NASA, the logo there. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
there you go.
On my own records, I've had probably 17 million charted listeners. And then all this Bob Seger stuff, it probably makes me one of the most often heard unknown guitar players in the world. Forrest McDonald, Howie McDonald, I never heard of that guy. Then I reinvented myself as a blues man, moved to Atlanta, started my own record company, put out 15 albums. The biggest show I ever played for was I headlined the Coca-Cola Riverwalk Festival for 200,000 people, which was unbelievable. And then the second largest crowd was the Melbourne Art Festival, 85,000 people. But now I play it a couple of times a year, 4 times a year at a local club for 100 people.
Yeah.
Just because I don't want to travel.
I had one CD here I was wanted to show you, well, with the price on it. It's got the glare.
The
Fame Studios.
The Fame Gang.
Yeah, there it is. And it's got, these are like some more rare and unissued tracks. Jimmy Hughes, James Barnett, George Bird, Prince Philip, Clarence Carter, some of those more Jimmy Hughes, from Rick Hall, who you mentioned earlier. Yeah, doing a lot of that recording production.
In fact, before I left LA, Steve called it quits. He had an operation on his throat and couldn't sing, and we had a couple of dates up. And Rob knew a sort of a blues keyboard player named Raymond Victor. And
Yeah.
Ray was actually on the Asia tour with us. But Ray subbed for Steve one night at Gazzari's on the Sunset Strip when we were playing with Van Halen. And we were doing an easy cover, Tower of Power's Don't Change Horses in the middle of the stream.
Yeah.
It's got, you know, a 4-bar intro. And after the first 3 bars, Ray picked up a big handful of peanuts, cocktail peanuts off, you know, one of the things. He's like that. And it's about 3 seconds before he's got to sing. And Skip Perkins, the bass player, he had never met Ray. He was just going on faith. And he said, wow, this guy must have some incredible chops. Because, you know, he's like, and about 1 second to go, it dawns on Ray, oh, I've got to start singing it. And
They all come out.
you know,
Oh man.
but I somehow became the band leader for the Kathy McDonald band, and we toured all of California and were incredible stars up in the Bay Area. And I got to play with one night we were playing at the Lion's Share in San Anselmo, and Mickey Hart, the drummer for the Grateful Dead, and Revenites, the lead singer for the Electric Flag, came in. And we're here, and they're just to my right, you know, on a couple of chairs. And we finished the song, and Nick said, hey, can we get up and do a blues with you? And I was like, oh yeah, because Nick did an album with Mike Bloomfield, one of my heroes. And there was a song called Blues on the West Side that was really great. So I said, sure. So Rob got off the drums, and Mickey Hart got up, and Nick sang this incredible blues. And I was doing my best Mike Bloomfield, and met so many people and jammed with so many people. But Steve called it quits. He moved back to Rhode Island, and I held out until September of '88, 5 years after I arrived in LA. I said, I'm going back to Muscle Shoals. So I rented a house there, and I played on Bobby Womack's The Roads of Life.
Okay.
Which was a really cool album. It's funny, one of the success tips at being a studio player is you really have to get deep into the song and relate it to a couple of things in your mind that it reminds you of, so you've got something to draw from, and then you try it. Well, the first solo I did for Bobby, the song reminded me of House Burning Down off the Electric Ladyland album, and a certain Jimi Hendrix lick. So I threw that in, and we got done with it, and I said, what do you think? And Bobby said, I hated it. It's like that. I said, okay, let's try it again. And I said, okay, 180-degree shift. And I dialed into exactly what the record was saying, and everything worked out for there. So he gave me $125 for every solo. I eventually went back to New England, and when I got into town, I stopped at a Kentucky Fried Chicken. It was November. It was very cold out, snowy, and there was only one table. All the other tables were full. Man, I sat down there. Now, mind you, in 1967, the Oxbow Incidents played in a Battle of the Band at Cranston High School. And I wore a top hat and a leather fringed jacket, and I played with my teeth, and I rolled around on the floor and everything. We didn't win because they're all rigged, but we were definitely the best showmanship. I'm there eating my chicken, and 4 guys came in. They got chicken, but there was no chairs. I said, hey, I got room over here. You guys can eat with me. So they said, okay, sure. We got to talking. Oh, I'm a guitar player, blah, blah, blah. And the guy said, oh, yeah, I went to Cranston High School and graduated in 68. I said, were you there for the Battle of the Bands and blah, blah, blah? And when the Oxbow incident, he said, yes, I saw you were the guy with the fringe coat and the top hat.
Do you remember that?
Remember that. So, you know, like 10 years later, you're at a restaurant, not my restaurant, but you run into some guy that saw you play. I went over to visit my friend Tony Carey in Germany, and he hooked up a bunch of dates for us. And I had no idea where we were going, and we played Poland and Czechoslovakia, and we went to Prague and all over Germany. We're at this club in Germany setting up, and there's a kid in there, and he came up to me with my Decade of Blues CD. And he said, will you sign this for me? And I thought, how did you get that?
Yeah.
How did you even know I was here? I didn't know I was going to be here. He said, I got it off the internet. And I said, thanks a lot. So you never know when somebody's going to just come out of the blue that you worked with a long time ago. I did hook up with James Montgomery, the harmonica player, and had him play harmonica on 2 T-Bone Walker songs I recorded on my What's It Gonna Take CD. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we recorded that at Prairie Sun Studio in Cotati, California. And I needed a set of acoustic guitar strings to play this Josh White song I mentioned an hour ago, Southern Exposure. And Raymond Victor, the keyboard player, had a big white beard, looked like Billy Gibbons. He walks in, he said to the guy at the counter, hey, I'll take a set of those pre-clipped, pre-tuned acoustic guitar strings. And the guy said, sure, coming right up. And then he stopped and he said, wait a minute. Do they make those? Imagine putting on a string that's already tuned up and it's already clipped to the right size. It was an absolutely absurd question, but the guy didn't. Oh, okay, let me see.
Right. Well, looking back, are there any artists that you haven't worked with that are still around that you would like to?
Let me think. Yeah, okay. Well, the Allman Brothers in '69 when I met them, mm-hmm. I brought my 55 maple neck Strat, and showed it to Dwayne, and he said, yeah, it's nice, but I said, well, I got a Gibson Firebird like Clapton played on the Goodbye Cream album. He said, come by tomorrow night and bring that. So I came by and I brought my college girlfriend, who was also Christine Hayward, and she was Swede and blonde hair and could play, So Dwayne picked it up and played a little bit. He said, it's pretty good. He said, but I just got this Les Paul I traded 100-watt stack for, so I'm going to use that. But Red Dog, bring it down to the stage. Well, Chris picked up the guitar and she played a couple of blues licks. And Dwayne was like, Dickie, you hear this girl? We got your replacement, man. You watch yourself or she's going to be in your spot. Everybody liked it. So we went down for the show and Red Dog had the Firebird. I'm standing right in front of Dwayne and they're doing whipping post. And it was maybe 15 seconds before his solo and he broke the G string. Oh. He put his guitar off. He said, Red Dog, throw me the Firebird. And Red Dog grabs my guitar and I see the Firebird launch, flying through the air 20 feet, right into Dwayne's hand. He plugged it in and jumped right in and started that solo. And all of my friends who were there knew it was my guitar. It's just a great, really cool. Well, you may or may not recall that Bonnie Bramlett sang with the Allman Brothers for a while later on. Well, she sent me a postcard to my previous address, and it was forwarded to my Muscle Shoals address. But it took 2 weeks for the forward. And the postcard said, Howie, I'm here with the Allman Brothers in a cabin in the woods in Macon. Here's the road name. Come on down. So I threw my guitar in the car. And 2 weeks late, I can't tell you, it's not easy finding a cabin in the woods with just some RRFD number, but I found it. And I pulled up, and there was a guy outside. I says, is this the Allman Brothers cabin? And he said, yeah, but you're too late. They left yesterday. And so I came within, that close. Did meet Skinner in LA at the Ralph's supermarket. And they were up at the Hyatt and said, come on up and party with us. Marshall Tucker Band, I did like Toy Caldwell's guitar playing a lot. I never met him. And then just about everybody who came after 1978, to me, they were all imitators. I mean, Joe Bonamassa's out kicking ass. Gary Moore, I never met him, but it's too late for that. I probably have met everybody I care to meet. I did meet T-Bone Walker playing at Central Square at Joe's Bar, 1970. I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was a hole in the wall. And I had just seen B.B. King opening for the Rolling Stones at the Boston Garden, and Mick Taylor was on guitar. So I met Mick. Here was T-Bone, who was clearly an originator from those guys. He listened to Blind Lemon Jefferson and Lonnie Johnson. And here he was at the bar on the break, depressed, drinking screwdrivers. I said, can I buy you a drink? And he said, yeah. I said, what are you drinking? Screwdrivers. Okay. So we got to talking, and the gig was over. He stayed at a crappy hotel and got on a Greyhound bus and went to the next city. And the inequality of the distribution of wealth throughout the world just is maddening, Without T-Bone, the Allman Brothers did Stormy Monday, and everybody was like, oh, listen to this is great, and even Barry Oakley said, well, we're going to do a Bobby Bland song. No, actually, it's a T-Bone Walker song. Allman Brothers were one of my favorites. Johnny Winter. I met Mike Bloomfield in LA at the Starwood, where we used to play a lot. The Tubes really weren't on my list, but Kathy McDonald knew them, and we went to their record company signing party and show, and that was cool. Did the same for Aerosmith when they auditioned for Columbia Records and that. And in fact, I sold Joe Perry my 100-watt Marshall stack. He and Tom Hamilton drove down to the Cape, and we talked, and he bought it from me. And one thing I'll add quickly, I had the perfect guitar band group called The Force in LA. Bobby Zinner was the other guitar player, and we both studied Clapton and Hendrix so much. We'd be in a big jam, and we taped everything on the cassette, and we'd go back to the apartment, and we'd be playing it back, and would say, is that me or you? We wouldn't know. But when the Cream played at the LA Forum, the next day they went into the Guitar Center, and they wanted all new amps. And Bobby had a friend who worked there and said, hey, I've got Eric Clapton's 50-watt Marshall stack. You want it? He said, yes, put it aside for me. So when Bobby and I played together, and whenever I'd look on the back and I'd see that Cream, it was the same stack that I met Eric behind in
Right.
'69. It was just like, wow, his amp is here.
Right.
You know,
Right.
um,
It traveled. It traveled. Yeah.
yeah,
Wow.
Bobby had a beautiful Tiger Stripe Les Paul. He ran into hard times and he sold it for $179,000.
Wow.
Peter Green, first guitar player for Fleetwood Mac, he had that beautiful Les Paul, and when he retired, he sold it to Gary Moore, and that was the one that Gary Moore played all the time. The Bridge of Sighs album was just so heavy, and I was playing Laguna Beach and staying at a friend's apartment, and he came in with this Oaxacan pot and hash oil, and we put on Bridge of Sighs and was just tripping out to it, how great it was. Well, Bobby Zinner knew Bill Lorden. Anyway, I played with Bill Lorden, and he was great. And he sent me all these autographed pictures I've got over here, and pictures of him playing with Hendrix and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, it's become pretty lengthy.
Yeah, it's become pretty late.
But you know what? You know what, Forrest, I appreciate all the stories. That's what's intriguing and interesting. That's what viewers really eat up. That's what they like. Is the little side stories and the anecdotes, and you did a great job with those.
Thank you. I appreciate you indulging me on my side.
I just like to, press the record and let you guys go at it. This is going to be on my YouTube channel.
Give us the name of your channel.
Okay, for me?
Yeah.
It is Pale Blooms and Beyond. Pale Blooms, like a flower bloom. PALE Blooms, BLOOMS, and Beyond. Pale
Right.
Blooms. Yeah.
Super.
So definitely we'll be posting on that until urge your viewers to visit my channel.
Yes.
And
yes.
yeah, and definitely, and likewise, and we'll see what kind of responses. What's intriguing to me, what I like the most, and probably yourself, is the responses and the comments.
Mm-hmm. And I look forward to seeing you down the Blues Highway, my friend.
There you go. All right. Well, all the best to you, okay, Forrest, and all the best to you. All right.
Peace, my brother.
Peace.
So long.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a great time, my friends. I'll see you down the Story Highway on the next musical moment with the old-time rock and roller. So long, my friends.